Hello, I'm Stephen Robinson. Welcome to the Play Typer Guide podcast. Joining me is my friend Maya Contreras. How are you?
I'm very good, I think.
Uh,
Yes, I am good. Yes, thanks for asking. How are you?
I'm all right. I will leap into this. Um, so last as we're recording this, so last night, um, uh, David Crowley won the nomination for governor in Wisconsin,
Hmm.
and what I noticed in this campaign, because his comeback was somewhat miraculous in the
Hmm.
sense that he had withdrawn from the race, and then was encouraged to come back in by the governor. Um, and also because I think he saw a bird. It was very inconsistent as to what had inspired him. His wife saw a bird, and but you know, it's interesting because there's a statement that the sort of it's been called this upset victory, even though he had sort of astounding support. Like unless it doesn't seem as if he was they're framing it as a sort of comeback victory, which perhaps is true, perhaps not. What is your take on that? Before I ask you sort of a general question about sort of the what we've been seeing in primary so far.
I would say the only thing that might be astounding about it is really how off the polls were, but polling during primaries are notoriously bad. So I think people forget that. They seem to have amnesia every primary season and forget it because Mom Donnie was also way down in the polls in New York City and then came back. I have a lot of thoughts on this election. So I will say miraculous to me is a framing that perhaps television pundits will like to grab onto, but it doesn't really explain the entire story. So,
Mhm.
like usual, I would say mainstream media is very quick to throw a frame on it to have their audience understand a very complicated state, is what I'll say.
Yes, and just that it in Wisconsin to have seen the rural voters and perhaps for center and moderate voters coming out for the black candidate from Milwaukee and hoping that the black candidate from Milwaukee would win was I found somewhat interesting, a different a case of what we've seen as to what was sort of the establishment candidate. He had objected to being called that. In fact, he said
Mhm.
it was a racist description. I wouldn't go that far. I mean, he did have establishment support. So
Right. So let me say two things. I do want to kind of define establishment in a moment because I think that some people are using it a little bit incorrectly, and then I want to talk really quickly about Wisconsin. I had the privilege of talking to Wisconsin voters, those who were very politically involved in 2020. They weren't just voters, they were poll workers, they were helping people get registered. These were deeply active people in Wisconsin. And in 2020, they were talking about their own frustrations with politics um, in Wisconsin. And if you don't know the history of Wisconsin, at one time it was incredibly progressive, and then it became incredibly right wing. And
mhm.
that was a concerted effort by the right wing in Wisconsin to take away voting rights, to close down polling locations, to rob Tony Evers, who is the outgoing governor now, of his mandate. So a lot of people may not remember this, but in 2012, a lot of people voted for Barack Obama, and then in 2016 for Hillary Clinton. About 45,000 less people voted in that election than they did in 2012. Well, what happened in between 2012 and 2016? A stringent voter ID law was passed. And people may not know this, but in Wisconsin, about a quarter of a million people do not have voter ID, did not have their voter IDs at that time period. Hillary Clinton only lost by 21,000 votes in
Mhm.
2016. So that means they were able to strip off enough voters during that time period. So a lot of people in Wisconsin are incredibly frustrated. And I think
Mhm.
there's this idea that we want to silo rural voters in Wisconsin and say that they're maybe Republicans. That's not true. they,
No.
they are all mixed. There's progressive ones, there's conservative ones, just like black people are not monolithic, neither are people in Wisconsin. And
and
then, go
and I
ahead.
wanted to get to that as well as
Yeah.
how that's being framed by a lot of people, especially to sort of, I think, denigrate the progressive movement as far as, and how to just to disband them. And also, I think people are often inclined to sort of have sort of check boxes about how voters vote or how they define themselves or what they
Mhm.
respond to. Um, and the points you make about Wisconsin are great. I mean, it often frustrates me. I can empathize with, if not, I get somewhat frustrated by the insistence on it of people who look at Clinton's loss in 2016 in those Rust Belt states, particularly, and blame voters or
Yeah.
either the Stein voters or voters who stayed home. People have complained about vote. Well, you came out for Obama and you didn't come out for Hillary or Harris. And often they ignore what you point out. It's like, well, why are you blaming voters instead of the Republicans who made it harder for people to vote?
Hmm.
It has been a long time kind of area of frustration for me. Yeah, and I'm glad you kind of brought this up because primaries, I get the primaries are sort of where the party has to have a vigorous debate over its direction. That's usually what
Hmm.
happens, right?
Yeah.
But lately I've observed what I call sort of the politics of fear. So it's not
Hmm.
unusual to see, as we discuss, appeals to electability in a general.
Yeah.
But in both Michigan, Wisconsin, I think Angie Craig, obviously far less successfully attempted
Hmm.
it in Minnesota. We've seen prominent Democratic influencers, strategists, even elected officials stoke fears about potential MAGA victories if the wrong candidate won, which is
Hmm.
not sort of an affirmatively positive argument about the preferred candidate. So to me, people will frame it as Wisconsin Democrats doing the smart thing when there are Democrats quoted as saying that Francesca Hong best reflected their own politics, but they were afraid that she couldn't win.
Yeah.
And against the existential issue that was the threat that Tom Tiffany posed as a MAGA election denier. But I don't know. I have issues with that sort of fear that someone not voting for the candidate they feel best represents their views because they are afraid of the Republican winning. Especially to me, the party should be sort of, we're going to vigorously debate policy,
Hmm.
and whoever our nominee is, as a party, we will, you know, try to win in a general. And sometimes it feels like I've seen a lot of this both in Michigan from elected officials. And again, this isn't like Bernie and Buster's in my sense. When I was there in
Hmm.
2016, it
Hmm.
felt like these are actual elected officials saying, if El Sayed wins, we're screwed. If
Hmm.
Hong wins, we're screwed.
Yeah.
And that basically elected officials and strategists are saying, if you nominate someone, even if you agree with this person, if this candidate wins, we are going to lose and it will be terrible. And that goes beyond sort of blunt honesty and more deliberate defeatism. So what's your thoughts on that?
I definitely think that this election cycle has completely been led by fear instead of what possibility there is within the policies that were being proposed. I've looked at Crowley's policies, I looked at Hong's policies. There's a marked difference between the two of them. The policies that she proposed on her website were quite normal progressive policies. I mean, she wanted to help fund schools, public schools. She wanted to help teachers like get a raise. She wanted to have health care for everybody. These aren't fringe policies. These are pretty mainstream policies. David Crowley's policies were a little bit of lip service. If you read through his policies, like saying, I'm going to increase the middle class, and I was like, oh, cool. How's he going to do that? And it says, I'm going to give more internships. I'm like, I don't know how that works. I'm not trying to listen. I'm not trying to criticize David Crowley. I'm just saying that this is kind of like he was saying more safe language. She was like more swinging a little bit more for the fences. But regardless, to me, one of the biggest mistakes that the media does and political consultants do is that they frame things through fear. They still stick with the whataboutism. They still do a lot of fear mongering instead of saying, how do we serve the public? the media has completely forgot that part of their role is to inform the public and to think about the public good. And if they had done that, they would have gone over the policies that Hong had and what Crawley had and debated both of them. That's not what happens in this country.
Mhm.
I saw a lot of cynicism um, from my old friend Shannon Watts. Hi, Shannon, if you see this.
I was not going to name names. I was
I'm
not going to
going to
name
name it.
names.
I'm not.
So
I'm going to
Shannon
name it
Watts.
because I'm going to name it because, listen, Shannon is somebody whose work with Moms Demand and helping start an organization that would advocate to prevent gun violence in this country is needed. It's not. It's beyond admirable. She flew across the country. She had death threats against her life. Like this was a really tough thing that she did. But the way she's politicking now, I don't agree with it. I'm kind of like, it's so cynical that I'm just like, I've said to her online, what, girl, what are we doing?
Well, and cynical is such a good point here because it to me, obviously, I'm someone who believes racism and sexism exists and in the media, and I write it. This is what I do, right?
Yeah.
And we've in your language talk about intersectionality, and I get all of that. I but I truly resent what I have seen as a cynical weaponization of identity from certain people to attack often progressivism in ways that aren't consistent. You can
Yeah.
see it. So again, since we're naming names, Shannon
Mhm.
Watts, someone who was sort of smearing Abdul El Sayed
He
as
was definitely smearing him.
a
Yeah.
misogynist and a sexist for
Yeah.
essentially going after Haley Stevens aggressively in a campaign in ways
Mhm.
that like they were saying like, oh, it's so sexist. They're mocking how she speaks or she talks, and I would be certain things of like, well, look, I've got some of the receipts about how Democrats talked about Ron DeSantis and his little the thigh high, and how they talked about Ted Cruz, like
Mhm.
the Eddie
Yeah.
Munster things and
Yeah.
whatever. Some of that is kind of politics and what happens, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so Shannon Watts was sort of pushing that, and Neera Tanden were pushing that, and like how misogynist was, and then it to me felt like they were not just silent, but promoting, one could say, a pretty gendered targeting of Hong as
Yeah.
crazy,
Mhm.
as everything, when they would say, um, like someone saying, comparing someone to HR was very gendered, but they were doing that with Hong as well about her Thanksgiving stuff and whatever. There was very clear targeting of her in those ways, saying that she's even crazy or radical, and I don't think she's crazy. I mean, no things,
Yeah.
and it was basically again not an affirmatively. Both, I it never seemed like both of Tandon and Watts that they were saying, "Oh, here's why I really like Crowley."
Yeah.
Because I don't
Well,
really know. It
that's
was like she is crazy and too dangerous to ever get elected, and that to me is just again cynical. But I'm sorry, you go.
Oh no, I was just going to say, and this is the framing that I would say moderates and centrists have been using now. Shannon calls herself a progressive liberal, which is a contradiction in terms. That's something for another time. But um, what she is doing, the type of framing she's doing, is the type of framing that Third Way think tank does, which is a self-proclaimed centrist think tank. And what Third Way does, instead of promoting the candidates that they work with, like Elisa Slotkin, what they're doing instead is spending $15 million to try to combat DSA candidates. To me, that's a tremendous waste of resources in an election year where that money could go out to attack Republicans. So to me, what Shannon is doing is a little fruitless. It's like I'm not a member of DSA. I'm not a joiner, though, Stephen. I'm just not a joiner. Is what
No,
I
me too.
I'm just not a
Well,
joiner. But I want to say that they're trying to fight DSA, and what they're not what Shannon is not recognizing, perhaps, and what Nina is not recognizing, or I'm sorry, saying it wrong.
Nira.
What Nira is not recognizing is that DSA is here to stay. They're only growing. And not only that, but they're having new chapters that are opening. And the big complaint is that it's not as diverse as they believe it should be. I agree with that, but I also see very, very engaged Black political influencers starting to say online, I'm starting a chapter of DSA, I'm joining a chapter of DSA. So to say that it's going to stay overwhelmingly white, which by the way, so is the Democratic Party, so is the Republican Party. I think people keep
Mm.
forgetting that we still have like 45, 50% of our voters within both of these parties are white, right?
Yeah.
And I think DSA is around the same thing. I think it's around 60. Again, I'm not trying to like big up DSA. I'm living in reality, and I know that they are somebody that are continuing to
Yeah.
build.
It's just it's cynical and it's identity based in ways that are unfair to people who are as you like you who are making clear things about being, identity and those things. It just seems like they're sort of using that to sort of beat up on a group rather than addressing it from a political standpoint. Because again, it seems like and it's weird. Often, Republicans famously have the sort of no enemies to my right, like JD Vance thing, which is just, look, we're going to trash these guys. Why would I trash anyone to my right? We're all in the family together. And it's sort of the idea is like, we might disagree on things, but to me, let's have the debate. But for me to go and say, Jesus, Maya's crazy, and let me reshare my Sarah Longwell article about why
Oh God.
Maya's crazy,
Yeah.
which is what I see like people
Yeah.
like Shannon doing, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, and also I get why she's pissed. I get why Nira's pissed because this is my own theory. Um, when you have liberalism, especially white women who are liberal, who define themselves as liberal, their identity of who they are. Um, Conservatives don't necessarily challenge that identity because it is the people to their left. So someone like you, who's sort of like, well, maybe that's not the most liberal view. You're challenging her sort of identity of herself, and that leads to perhaps some of the contempt we have seen for people who view the world a little differently, but who should still be allies. But there's
Yeah.
a sense of these guys. There's someone, I'm definitely not going to name her. She's online. She's quite famous, but she really goes on tears against progressives and she calls them scumbags and
Oh,
all this sort of stuff and a dirtbag left and they're stalking me and they're evil and all this sort of stuff. And I don't, it is the sense of one, I would say, get offline. I think
yeah.
certain cases,
Well,
I,
I hope she's not being stalked. I mean, that's one thing, but um, I would say that the quick dismissal of the left, again, no group is monolithic. I don't
no,
understand why we haven't understood this as a whole as a country. No group is monolithic. Like, let me just use a strange thing here. My husband is a Southern white guy. His background is Italian, white,
mhm,
and uh, he he looks great in a cowboy hat. He refuses to wear one because he doesn't want anyone. He was like, "What if people think I'm conservative?" Like he's
mhm,
pro-trans, He is somebody that deeply cares about immigrants and migrants, and on and on and on. So he thinks that that would signal that he is conservative and therefore he is not safe. And to me, my argument is I feel like people who are pro-trans community should who are cis white men like him should take up that space, wear the cowboy hat, take up that space,
yeah,
and show why people aren't monolithic. But that's what I'm saying. I
yeah,
think that people keep forgetting that not all groups are monolithic. I want to say something really fast because I want to go back to Shannon and Nira for a moment.
sure,
One of the reasons why I kind of understand why there was a bitterness there is a lot of it has to do still with the fallout from 2016, which is now 10 years ago.
10 years.
10 years ago. But there was a lot of bitterness in how Bernie behaved. And I'm one of those people that spoke out against him and how he behaved. And he's somebody that I still don't care for. And I have my own specific reasons. It has nothing to do with his policies because I agree with his policies. It has to do with the way he behaved. Nira and Shannon also speak out against Hassan Piker a lot. Hassan Piker is not my cup of coffee, but he also has a massive audience and he's very influential. One of the reasons why I don't like Hassan Piker and why I don't like Bernie Sanders is because I believe that when we talk about decolonial frameworks, which is very important to me, we live in a colonial country. We are still living in the aftermath of that. they only discuss a tiny bit of that. They're talking about class. They talk a little bit about they'll talk about Palestine, but they won't see the full picture of what it is to be decolonial. I like to
Mm,
use the entire framework, and that means you have to discuss gender, you have to talk about transphobia, you have to talk about racism, you have to talk about all these other things because it's attached to capital. And
yeah,
part of colonialism was constructing social hierarchies.
yeah,
And so Sanders and Hassan Piker are not good at they're not only are they not good at that, they're still not really good in discussing it or languaging it. I'm not
sure.
interested in that. I'm interested in centering people that understand that we need to, like the woman from the WNBA, Cunningham, who's really
So yeah,
transphobic. She is living inside a colonial mindset.
yeah,
You know, she doesn't read. But this is why, for me, Shannon and Near, where they do themselves a disservice, instead of targeting Hassan Piker, why don't you uplift somebody that you agree with instead? Why
they,
don't you
yeah,
promote somebody else that you're saying, Hassan Piker is not my cup of tea. These are the women that we like. You guys should follow them online. I think they spend
yeah.
more money trying to tear down than uplift somebody.
Well, they certain people would do this years ago with AOC, so they would resent that she would get coverage and would be, I think, unfairly bring up Lauren Underwood of like, well, every time, but it would be every time, and it's like, well, you could proactively talk about Lauren Underwood, but don't bring her up whenever you want to cut down AOC. That's just
Yeah.
not effective. Which is interesting because when you talk about Hassan Piker, and I've written about this as well, because people have like Joe Scarborough and others saying Democrats should just, disavow him and go Sister Soldier and Jeremiah Wright. Obviously there's one white
Right.
moderate say to do that. I get that.
Yeah.
And to me, the issue is sort of, as you point out, the issue is you in certain ways, when they want to disavow Piker, it's not for the reasons that you are suggesting. They want to disavow him in ways that he is arguably less radical than you are and how he thinks. So to me, it's like someone says, well, it's not so hard. Why can't they just disavow him, not be seen with him, et cetera, et cetera? And it's like, then they bring up these examples. It's like, well, and I think that perhaps it's the bubble that a lot of center left liberals. It's like, well, you understand that, like, well, one, taking things out of context, furthering right wing framing about America deserved 9/11 or so forth. But if you
Mhm.
dig into that, sort of what you want to disavow is sort of anyone having a sort of, as you say, post-colonial view of, or critical view of American foreign policy, or how we made actions that led to, like, we don't even discuss in America the actions we literally made that led to the attack on Pearl Harbor.
Mhm.
It's like a secret thing. If you were to
Mhm.
ever talk to someone about how this led, like what Americans had done to essentially provoke Japan and make them say, "Oh, we have to like sort of become an imperial power against the U.S." Like that's seen as like hating America, and so to me, it's kind of like that's what Republicans seem to get, which is sort of that, it's not about disavowing Marjorie Taylor Greene when she was at her peak.
Yeah.
They get that, like, okay, well, she actually represents a not insignificant segment of our voters. I'm not going to go and say that all of my voters suck or
Mhm.
these voters suck or who represent. I got to figure a way to thread this needle. And I think that their sense is like cut loose these people, but a lot of them are people like you, like the thoughts and the views that you might have. So it's not even sort of, oh, my issue, and I think their issue of Tom Piker might be some, toxic masculinity issues or whatever. That's
Mhm.
fine or whatever. But when they're sort of leaping on issues that are in areas that are part of left wing thought, and a lot
Mhm.
of Democrats are doing now, it's just sort of, maybe because I'm in those circles, I don't agree with all, but it's like these people exist, right? Like when they were going against Hong, it's like she's just not one. It's not like she's just one quote unquote crazy lady. There's a lot of people who have views that she expressed,
Mhm.
and so how are you as a party making those people, those views, feel welcome? Like you can't build a coalition when you are calling people within that coalition crazy. Like again, as you said, uplift the people who best reflect your values. But
Yeah.
like, if I'm just beating up on you all day, or if you're beating up on me all day, that's
Right.
not productive. We should be out kind of saying what we believe, right? And there's alignment, and then maybe there's not alignment, but like beating up on each other doesn't help. What's your thought on
It,
that?
it doesn't help. And also, like, let's face it, Nira retweeted Laura Loomer, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly. I was going to bring that up. Yeah,
yeah, and Shannon Watts is she's embraced the bulwark, right? It's like you guys are so freaked out what's happening to the left of you, but you're okay with embracing the right of you. And to me, that's utter hypocrisy. And I don't really have a tolerance for hypocrisy. Like, I understand we don't have to see eye to eye, but I don't like it when somebody being cynical and is being a hypocrite. So that's where my frustration is. And also, like, what I want people to understand is I was talking to my sister-in-law about this because I was talking about the top 15 podcasters, and the vast majority of them are men, and the vast majority of those men are white, and a lot of those men are incredibly problematic. Dax Shepard and Joe Rogan. And they say things all the time that are absolutely awful and racist and this. And yet they're like, Kamala, please go on to Joe Rogan. Please go on to Dax Shepard. Please, like, right. So you want to go on to those podcasts where those guys are saying absolutely transphobic trash, like saying racist things, anti-black things, but you don't want her to go on to Piker show. Like, make it make sense. You guys have to be like, they have to be consistent in that. If you don't want people to go onto problematic podcasts, then maybe not go on the top 15. All those multimillionaires. I mean, I am. To me, I'm not surprised that we live in a country that's going to center problematic white cis men. That's what I
sure.
say. That's when I say
Yeah,
when I say decolonial mindset. We're all in a colonial
and
mindset, and we're fine with
and
centering
let me
people.
throw this example out to you.
Yeah.
If J.K. Rowling, just for the sake of argument, had decided to campaign with Haley Stevens because she doesn't like Trump and she believes that, you know, we need to flip the Senate, even if she's not, but she's just saying, like, as an observer, I support Haley Stevens or whatever, and Stevens brings her out.
Yeah.
And El Sayed had been like, "This woman's a crazy transphobe. How
Yeah.
dare you? How dare you appear with her, disavow her?" People would say he's crazy. It would be like, how woke and crazy this is. What are you talking about? Like, I was hearing all this. You said this used to be. It's like, okay, well, don't throw out someone just for one issue. And people were saying with Piker, it's like, but and I had concerns about campaigning with um, Liz Cheney, mostly because I felt it wasn't going to be effective, and
Yeah.
what we needed to do to turn out the people who didn't show up
Hmm.
were people who, again, black people and minority, certain people who that wasn't helping, and she didn't, and Cheney herself represented many of the reasons they couldn't show up because she didn't
Hmm.
support voting rights legislation. But if you're going to say that, like, Cheney, who's anti-choice, pretty much every issue, that's fine. But
Hmm.
like, Piker is unacceptable. It just seems as if you are defining certain values on
Hmm.
the left as completely, and people are insistent upon this. Whenever I bring up the whole Charlie Kirk issue, people
Yeah.
are surprised. Like, they're, well, no, that was different. It was like, what are you talking about? He talked about black women horrifically,
Hmm.
and it's something of where, again, this is not trying to be a Sam Piker fanboy. I just use the example of, like, when I see a Democrat, and again, Shannon Watts had done this and others do it with, like, they they do the sort of right wing propaganda of saying, "Oh, Piker said America deserved 9/11," when it was originally maybe been this. Like, you go to what the right wingers had stated, right?
Hmm.
And when people were writing that, like, well, this is this horrible thing that Charlie Kirk had said about black women, Vance actually was like, no, that was taken out of context. You are
Hmm.
smearing my dead
Yeah.
friend. What he actually said was that these
Oh yeah.
specific black women suck and
Yeah.
whatever, and putting them on the fence. And I'm just saying, if you are, but we live in a world where Charlie Kirk, I mean, I was, I, we, I don't know if we discussed this. I was stunned after his death. I realized I had been in a bubble of the number of people. like, from Kristen Chenoweth to Jamie Lee
Mm-hmm.
Curtis, who were just like, oh, what a sweet guy. He just go to college campuses and just wanted to debate issues, which actually wasn't happening. He was sort of a vile racist, a foul, transphobe,
Mm-hmm.
and like he was openly viewed. And if you as a Democrat will promote the narrative that he was just a guy doing politics the right way, debating issues, and you must extend that to some Piker. Like even if you disagree with him, like if you are not, it just seems again it's this hypocrisy that's hard for me to understand.
Yeah.
Like when to me the idea that like when Gavin Newsom had Kirk on his podcast and
Mm-hmm.
stated that his son, his 13-year-old son,
Mm-hmm.
was a fan of Kirk, like Kirk,
Yeah.
who has been, um, I would say, was a radicalizing force of young white men on
Mm-hmm.
college campuses
Mm-hmm.
and young people with like, you know, uh, radicalizing them more with misogynistic statements, racist, transphobic views, and to have someone eventually seeking the Democratic Party nomination, saying, "My son, my young son, loves this guy, loves getting
Mm-hmm.
radicalized." The idea that he would never say that about Piker, but
Yeah.
the true example would be a
Yeah.
Republican saying, "Oh, my son listens to Hassan Piker, and it's awesome." Like no Republican would ever say that. So it was a weird thing of this of, and you've had your arguments of how it's all sort of kind of with white supremacy and what we consider normalized
Mm-hmm.
behavior. But as I said, I was very surprised by how Charlie Kirk had been normalized beyond what I thought he'd been normalized as.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised because a lot of people, after they read in his bio, white Christian, they stop there and that's good enough for them, right? It's like to be fine with most Klan members, right? So I wasn't that surprised. Gavin Newsom to me is a hack straight up, and that's why I wasn't surprised that he would say that. Like to me, I was kind of like, well, of course he would let his son. He's a bad dad. You know, he used to date Kimberly Guilfoyle. I mean, this guy is a moderate or conservative. If someone's going to pretend, like, if he even tries to pretend that he is at all progressive, I will laugh in his face. There's just like literally no way. So, to me, I am not surprised about this at all. And he, by the way, okay, so let me talk about establishment for 1 second because I wanted to bring this up at the beginning because it gets thrown around so much, online. Gavin Newsom is to me what the definition of establishment would be. And Jasmine Crockett, where a lot of people called her establishment, she wouldn't fit the definition of it. And I want to like talk about what establishment, how it's actually defined and how it's moving into to different meanings. So establishment has been a word since like the 15th century. It doesn't really get the terminology that we use until 1955. There was this journalist named Henry Farley. He was Scottish. He was a Tory. If you guys don't know what a Tory is, it's like the
Mm.
Republican in England. And he's the one that really came up with the definition we use now. And how he said it was the social matrix of, of of individuals, of people, and institution. And social is very important here. This means who is in the room, who is allowed in the room. Gavin Newsom is allowed in all the rooms. I bet if Peter Thiel was like, hey, Gavin, you want to come over? He would do it. And I bet if Gavin Newsom said to Peter Thiel, can I come over and talk to you? Peter Thiel would be like, man, come on over. That's not necessarily true of someone like Jasmine Crockett. And I think people need to understand why, yes, if you want to define, now, one of the things I talk about in my book is semantic prosody, which is that a word, depending on how it's being attached to things around it, takes on a definition, takes on the definition. So woke can be positive or negative depending on the words used around it. Establishment right now has negative prosody around it. It didn't always. In England, it'd be like,
Mm.
I'm proudly part of the establishment, right? But here in America, establishment is a very negative connotation. And right now, it's moved into this thing where it's defined as just corporate PAC money. And I would say also like institutional backing, right? So
Mm.
Chuck Schumer would be, I would consider Chuck Schumer to be the establishment. Where I see a little bit of difference, and I'm fine with people just defining it that way. But I'm saying the true definition includes the social aspect. So when Barack Obama became president, um, he was giving a speech, and I think there was the infamous story where a couple of Republicans, including Newt Gingrich and Mitch McConnell, were in a steakhouse in Washington, D.C. Do you know about this story?
Hmm.
Yeah, so they were sitting around drinking whiskey, and they said, we're going to make sure that Barack Obama is a one-term president. We're going to make sure that he is as powerless as possible. Like, he barely got the ACA through. He didn't even have a chance to put the public option through. Obama was not allowed to be in this social circle, a social circle that was determining power in Washington, D.C. Even though Barack Obama was the president of the United States and taking corporate money and had a lot of connections, he was not allowed in all the rooms of the social matrix of power and institutions. So if you want to call Barack Obama the establishment, you absolutely can. Does he? But then we have to also recognize that establishment has different levels. Then,
Sure.
so that's why I want people to understand when you just say, "Oh, Jasmine Crockett's the establishment." I have to ask you, well, what rooms is she allowed into, and what rooms is she not allowed to? Is she taking corporate PAC money? Sure, then you can call her the establishment that way. Does she have institutional backing? Sure, then you can call her. Now, David Crawley and Francesca Vaughn. Now, Crawley will have, you can call, you, he doesn't call himself an establishment candidate. He does have establishment backing. I would call
Yeah.
Tony Evers part of the establishment. He had a lot of corporate backing. So you can definitely say that. Does David Crawley have access to all the rooms? I don't know. I would assume not. And so that's why I want people to think about it. And I will say one last thing about it. When people have said, well, some white people are using it as a slur against black people. Sure, maybe, but not really. Like, a lot of people are not using it as a slur.
No, I think they just mean people in a position of power. And you make a good point here, but also, and this could be seen as racially coded, but like someone could be a tool of the establishment, which is not in the rooms, but you are being, and that's some of the cynical aspect of it, right? Like sort of using black people or people of color or what, creating a diverse face on a corrupt system, which often people have criticized about corporations doing, right? Like, we're this cool, diverse corporation, but you're still polluting or whatever. I mean, it's great that your CEO is a woman, but you're polluting and doing all the evil stuff. But go ahead.
And that was once called a window dressing. But I will
Yeah.
also say that I wouldn't say that like a lot of white people have a PhD in like racism and bigotry, and they're well versed, so they can take any word and racialize it. So yes, when people say no one has ever used it as a racial slur, that wouldn't necessarily be true, because people definitely have. We use DE. I mean, people are using DEI and CRT as a racial slur, right? So I'm sure some people have used it as a racial slur. Does the vast majority of people do that? No. They're really talking about the fact that we're tired of people. When I use establishment, I am talking about the original 1955 definition, where I'm saying I want those people who are in the rooms not to have that power. They shouldn't have 5 people like Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and being able to just sit in a room together and decide. They are unelected officials. They have all the money, and they are deciding who gets elected. They are deciding who gets the backing. That's who I don't want to have power. And that's where my concern is with regards to any kind of establishment. So I'll say that.
Yeah. And that's a good place for us to stop for part 1. For part 2, if you tune in, be posting next week, I want to kind of go into sort of Democrats referring to DSA as this hostile takeover, because I think that also speaks to how establishment isn't necessarily about being in power, because being in power, if you're not supposed to be in the room, how that's often viewed as sort of a threat. So tune in next week. We'll get into that. Thank you.